Emma Brooks hadn't slept in 4 days. The sterile lights of Mercy Children's Hospital seared into her vision whenever she closed her eyes. Her son, Tyler, 8 years old and full of mischief until 2 weeks ago, now lay motionless beneath a maze of 4 tubes. Between long shifts at his bedside and frantic calls with specialists, Emma barely remembered the world outside those hospital walls. Until the letter came. It waited on her front porch in a crisp, white envelope, stamped with the cold seal of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She might have ignored it, had she not seen the name scrawled across the corner. Marlene Fairbanks, HOA President. Emma tore it open with trembling hands. Notice of violation. Your property is in violation of Willow Creek Covenant 3A.03. Trash receptacles must be stored out of public view within 24 hours after city collection. A fine of $75 has been assessed. Repeated violations will result in escalating penalties, liens, or legal action. Emma stared at the letter, unable to breathe. Trash bins. She had left the trash bins by the curb. Between hospital runs, sleepless nights, and raw fear, it hadn't even crossed her mind. A thick bitterness rose in her throat. She crumpled the letter in her fist and stumbled inside, slamming the door behind her. Mark, her husband, stood in the kitchen, a hospital duffel half-packed at his feet. He looked up sharply. What happened? Emma shoved the letter toward him. Read. His eyes scanned the page, his face hardening with each line. This is insane, he muttered. I told them. I emailed the whole board, told them about Tyler. Apparently rules matter more than people, Emma said, voice breaking. Mark dropped the letter onto the table. I'll call Marlene. She'll back off once she hears from me directly. Emma doubted it. Everyone in Willow Creek knew Marlene Fairbanks. She was the kind of person who had weaponized her position, treating HOA covenants like holy scripture. Lawn grass measured by the inch. Holiday lights fine if displayed, outside the approved period. Even rogue garden gnomes had earned warnings under her reign. And now, even with Tyler fighting for his life, Marlene was circling like a vulture. The next morning, Mark sent a carefully worded email explaining everything again. Tyler's hospitalization, the emergency circumstances, their intention to comply once life allowed. Marlene's reply arrived within the hour. All residents are expected to adhere to community standards, regardless of personal circumstances. Failure to comply may result in additional penalties. No sympathy. No reprieve. Only a thinly veiled threat. Emma read the email 3 times, hoping she had missed some hidden humanity. There was none. She felt something inside her shift, a small, sharp splinter of anger lodging deep into her chest. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. This time, it wasn't just a letter. It was a packet, stapled, official, heavy with contempt. Inside, a second violation notice, the fine now $150, and a series of grainy photographs. Their front yard, the bins, the slightly drooping lawn, even the porch, where Emma had abandoned a folding chair after a midnight sprint back from the hospital. Each image had a time stamp. Each screamed, "You're being watched." Emma gripped the counter to steady herself. She's stalking us. Mark read the packet, his jaw set like stone. We're not letting her get away with this. But the next day, Mark caught her, Marlene, standing across the street in broad daylight, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of their house. He stormed out the door. Marlene, he called across the street. She turned, perfectly composed in her powder blue cardigan and sensible heels. Just documenting community violations, Mr. Brooks, she said brightly. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings. You know what's happening with our son, Mark said, voice tight. And you're still threatening us over trash cans? Marlene's smile never wavered. The rules exist for a reason. Fairness means consistency. I'm simply upholding community standards. Mark shook his head in disbelief. You're heartless. Marlene shrugged. Personal struggles, while unfortunate, don't exempt anyone from the bylaws. She clicked her pen with finality, turned, and walked away without a second glance. By that evening, Emma felt the neighborhood's eyes on her. Blinds twitched as she drove up. A lawnmower paused mid-row. People knew, but no one spoke. Fear kept them silent. Marlene ruled by intimidation, and no one wanted to be the next target. The final blow landed 1 week later. Emma came home from another grueling hospital shift to find a bright orange notice taped to their front door. Notice of intent to file lien. Due to unpaid violations totaling $450, Willow Creek HOA will proceed with legal remedies, including property liens and collection actions. Emma stared at it, pulse pounding in her ears. They weren't just threatening fines now. They were threatening their home. She staggered into the living room and sank onto the couch, the notice fluttering from her hands. Mark knelt beside her, his face pale with fury. "This is war," he said quietly. Emma looked around their home. Tyler's abandoned toys, framed family photos, all of it now under siege because they had dared to prioritize their dying child over garbage bins. Something cold and immovable settled inside her. "This ends at the next board meeting," she said. "We fight back." Mark nodded grimly. "We'll show them what real fairness looks like." Outside, twilight bled across the sky. Emma sat at the window and watched as Marlene, clipboard in hand, made her slow, deliberate rounds, the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Creek. Emma didn't flinch. For the first time in weeks, she felt not despair but resolve. Marlene Fairbanks had picked the wrong family to bully. And soon, the whole world would know it. The Willow Creek Community Center smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, an appropriate setting, Emma thought, for what was about to happen. She sat rigid in the metal folding chair, Mark beside her, clutching a slim folder marked evidence. Around them, the regulars had begun to filter in, familiar faces from block parties, cookouts, Halloween parades, neighbors who now avoided their eyes. At the front of the room, Marlene Fairbanks arranged papers with the precision of a surgeon. Her pink sweater set gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Her hair, sprayed to immobility, didn't shift as she moved. Emma's gaze hardened. Marlene wasn't just a busybody. She was a tyrant cloaked in bureaucracy. "Good evening, everyone," Marlene chirped once the clock struck 7. "Let's get started." The other board members, Rick Dalka, Susan Miles, and Greg Patel, nodded politely. None of them met Emma's eyes. Marlene continued. "First order of business, outstanding violations, and enforcement proceedings." Emma's heart pounded as Marlene's eyes slid over the assembled crowd and landed on her like a knife. "We have one particularly egregious case involving multiple infractions, disregard for regulations, and a pending lien." A low murmur stirred the room. Mark stood, steady and deliberate. "Before you continue, we request time to speak." Marlene arched a penciled eyebrow. "This is not a public forum." Mark's voice rang out anyway. "Our son is hospitalized. We explained this multiple times. Your fines aren't just unjust, they're cruel." He pulled a photo from the folder, Tyler, small and pale in his hospital bed, and held it up. Gasps rippled through the room. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Jenkins, the sweet old woman from 2 doors down, pressed a hand to her mouth. Emma rose to stand beside Mark, her voice surprisingly steady. "We're fighting for our child's life. And instead of compassion, we get threats." Marlene's expression didn't waver. Emotional appeals don't negate legal obligations. Rick Dalka cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at the Brookses. Maybe we should reconsider the fines, given the circumstances." Marlene shot him a look sharp enough to silence. Emma saw it, and something else, fear. Even among her fellow board members, Marlene ruled by intimidation. Not for much longer. When the meeting adjourned, Emma and Mark gathered their materials, but they weren't alone. Mrs. Jenkins shuffled over first, her blue eyes brimming. "I'm so sorry, dear," she whispered. "If I'd known." Behind her came Diego Alvarez, a gruff but kind contractor who lived on the next block. He jerked his chin toward Marlene, still holding court by the snack table. "She's had this coming for years," he muttered. "Just needed a reason." Emma glanced around. Others lingered, hesitant, watching, waiting. A crack had formed in Marlene's armor tonight. And cracks, Emma knew, only grew wider under pressure. By the weekend, word had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Neighbors they barely knew came forward, whispering horror stories. Marlene finding a veteran for a non-regulation flagpole, harassing a single mother over an unapproved mailbox color, threatening an elderly couple over a decorative fountain. A dozen small injustices. Isolated, they'd been survivable. Together, they painted a portrait of a dictator hiding behind neighborhood covenants. Mark created a private group chat, discreet, invite-only, called Willow Creek United. Within 2 days, it had 47 members. Emma scrolled through the messages, heart pounding with new energy. Diego, she fined me $100 for parking my truck on my own driveway. Mrs. Jenkins said my daughter's birthday balloons were unauthorized signage. Priya Nand set me a violation because my wreath was out of season. In February, every new message fanned the flames of resistance. Meanwhile, Marlene only doubled down. More violations appeared. More threats. She sensed the shift and responded the only way she knew, with more control. On Monday, a new letter arrived at the Brookses' home, a notice of board hearing scheduled for 2 weeks later. The charges? Chronic noncompliance, disruptive conduct at meetings, damaging the community's reputation. The hearing could escalate to formal legal action, even foreclosure proceedings if they didn't comply. Emma sat at the kitchen table, reading the notice under the harsh light. "They're trying to scare us into backing down," she said. Mark leaned over her shoulder. "Then they're going to be very disappointed." He tapped the corner of the notice. "We'll be ready. And this time, everyone will see it." They planned carefully. Evidence was gathered. Old emails, video recordings, neighbor testimonies. Tyler's doctors provided a statement verifying his condition during the alleged violations. Mark contacted a lawyer, Tessa Ward, a sharp local attorney known for her no-nonsense courtroom presence, who agreed to represent them pro bono once she heard the full story. Meanwhile, Emma spearheaded a new project, documenting every instance of Marlene's abuses of power across the neighborhood. Neighbors anonymously submitted photos, letters, even recordings. One chilling clip showed Marlene standing outside a neighbor's window, photographing holiday decorations at midnight. "This isn't about us anymore," Emma said one night, uploading evidence into a shared drive. "It's about all of Willow Creek." Mark squeezed her hand. "Then let's make it count." The night before the board hearing, Emma barely slept. Images of Tyler, pale and hooked to machines, flashed behind her eyelids. Images of Marlene, smiling coldly at their pain, soon followed. But she also saw Diego's angry face, Mrs. Jenkins' tearful smile, Tessa Ward's steady, confident voice. They weren't alone anymore. At dawn, Emma stepped outside onto the porch. The sun was rising over Willow Creek, casting the rows of neat, identical houses in golden light. For the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself a small, grim smile. Tomorrow, Marlene Fairbanks would learn what happened when you tried to crush a family that had nothing left to lose. And the whole world would be watching. Emma squeezed Mark's hand as they pushed through the throng. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes, some sympathetic, others skeptical, all hungry for whatever drama tonight would unleash. At the head of the room sat the HOA board, elevated behind a long plastic table. Marlene Fairbanks presided at the center, her pink sweater set replaced by a navy blazer, her lips pressed into a prim, triumphant line. Mark set down their folder of evidence with a quiet thunk. Across from them, their attorney, Tessa Ward, adjusted her glasses and offered a tight, reassuring smile. "Stick to the facts," she murmured, "and let her hang herself." Emma nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. Marlene called the meeting to order with a gavel bang that echoed sharply through the hall. "As stated," she said, voice clipped and formal, "this hearing concerns chronic violations, disruptive behavior, and reputational harm caused by the Brooks family." Low gasps fluttered from the crowd, but Marlene pressed on unfazed. "We will present evidence of noncompliance," she said, gesturing at a stack of photographs and letters before her. The accused may respond after. Emma bit back a surge of rage. Accused. As if they were criminals. The first 20 minutes were a parade of trivialities. Photos of their trash bins. Printouts of neighborhood bylaws. A grainy recording of Mark speaking passionately at the last meeting, framed by Marlene as aggression. It was absurd. It was maddening. And it was exactly what they had expected. When Marlene finally finished, she sat back with an air of smug finality. "You may now defend yourselves," she said, barely disguising her boredom. Mark rose first. "Thank you," he said, voice firm but controlled. "Before we respond, we'd like to submit a statement from our son's physicians." He handed the document to the board. "It verifies Tyler's hospitalization during the times in question. We were not neglecting HOA rules. We were trying to keep our child alive." A ripple of emotion stirred the crowd, murmured sympathy, shuffling feet. Emma stood next. She spoke plainly, letting raw honesty edge her voice. "You fined us for trash bins and lawn chairs while we sat in an ICU. You threatened our home while we prayed we wouldn't lose our son. And when we asked for mercy, you answered with escalation." She held up the neon orange lien notice, letting it flutter like a warning flag. "This isn't about rules anymore," she said, locking eyes with Marlene. "This is about power. About cruelty disguised as community standards." Tessa Ward stepped forward then, calm and deadly. "We'd like to present evidence of discriminatory and retaliatory practices by the HOA president," she said, her voice slicing through the tension. The projector clicked to life. Photos flashed on the wall. Marlene photographing houses at night. Selective enforcement. Violations issued to newcomers but not longtime friends. Multiple instances where Marlene had overridden board votes to personally pursue fines. Witness after witness stood, reading statements. Diego describing how Marlene targeted contractors. Mrs. Jenkins, voice trembling, recounting the night Marlene berated her for a garden gnome. Priya Nand testifying about racial bias in enforcement practices. Each voice built the case like bricks in a wall, solid, undeniable. The crowd shifted from uneasy to openly angry. Marlene's composure began to crack. She scribbled notes furiously, interrupting witnesses, objecting weakly to procedures. Tessa remained unshakable. "Under Virginia Code Section 55 to 513, she said at one point, homeowners associations are required to act in good faith and avoid arbitrary enforcement." She glanced at the audience. Clearly, that has not occurred here. Marlene's face flushed an ugly red. "This is a smear campaign," she hissed. "No, Mrs. Fairbanks," Tessa said coolly. "It's accountability." After nearly 2 brutal hours, the board retreated for deliberations, a legal formality given the tidal wave of evidence, but still, they huddled behind the partition. The room buzzed like a live wire. Neighbors crowded around Emma and Mark, offering hugs, handshakes, whispered congratulations. "This is long overdue," Diego said, clapping Mark on the back. Mrs. Jenkins wiped her eyes. "You're giving us all hope, dear." Emma clung to these small moments, breathing them in like oxygen. But she never took her eyes off Marlene, sitting stiffly in her chair, jaw clenched alone. The queen without her court. 20 minutes later, the board returned. Rick Dalka, who until tonight had been little more than Marlene's rubber stamp, cleared his throat. After careful consideration, he said, voice trembling slightly, "We find that the violations issued against the Brooks family were excessively punitive and improperly motivated." A surge of murmured excitement rippled through the crowd. "We hereby rescind all fines, dismiss the pending lien, and issue a formal censure against Mrs. Fairbanks for misconduct." Emma gripped Mark's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Marlene surged to her feet. "You can't censure me," she barked. "I am this board." Rick's voice grew steadier. "You were." He glanced at the others, Susan, Greg, who nodded grimly. "Effective immediately," he said, "you are removed as HOA president." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then the crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, Even a few whoops of victory filled the community center as Marlene stood frozen, disbelief etched across her face. Emma allowed herself one single second, to meet Marlene's furious gaze and smile. Then she turned her back. As they gathered their things, a local teenager, a YouTuber Emma vaguely recognized, darted over. "Miss Brooks," he said, breathless. "I filmed the whole thing. It's already blowing up online. 2,000 views and climbing." He showed her the thumbnail. "HOA tyrant gets obliterated at board meeting, must see." Emma laughed, a real laugh, the first in what felt like months. Maybe this was bigger than Willow Creek now. Maybe the world needed to see what standing up looked like. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Emma glanced back one last time at the community center, where Marlene was still arguing with no one, where neighbors were still shaking hands, where history had just shifted. Mark wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Home?" he asked.
"Home," she said.
But as they walked toward their car, the flashing blue and red lights cresting the hill made them both stop cold. A police cruiser rolled into the parking lot, sirens off but lights spinning. Two uniformed officers stepped out. One of them, a young woman with a no-nonsense gait, approached the crowd. "We're here for Mrs. Marlene Fairbanks," she announced loudly enough for half the parking lot to hear. "We have a warrant for harassment, trespassing, and unlawful surveillance." Gasps rippled like aftershocks. Emma turned, just in time to see Marlene's face crumple as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Phones whipped out, recording every second. In the spinning lights, Marlene Fairbanks, once queen of Willow Creek, was led away, shouting protests no one bothered to hear. Emma stared, stunned. Mark let out a low, astonished whistle. "Well," he said, "that escalated quickly." Emma exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lift from her chest. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she knew. The real fallout had only just begun. The story of Marlene Fairbanks' downfall exploded across every corner of the internet within hours. Clips of her being arrested, face twisted, shouting about property values and ungrateful neighbors, flooded YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook groups across the country. HOA Karen gets arrested at board meeting trended for 3 straight days. By morning, national news stations had picked it up. By afternoon, talk show hosts were making jokes at her expense. Emma sat at the kitchen table, Tyler's hospital discharge paperwork spread before her, the muted glow of the television filling the room. Mark scrolled his phone, occasionally snorting at the latest memes. A particular favorite showed Marlene photoshopped into a Monopoly board with a caption, "Go directly to jail. Do not collect $200. For the first time in months, their laughter came easily. "Looks like she's famous," Mark said, tossing his phone down. Emma smiled tiredly. Not the way she wanted. The front door creaked open, and Tyler shuffled in from the living room, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His color had returned. The worst of the storm was behind them. "Mom," he said, voice small, "are we gonna lose our house?" Emma knelt in front of him instantly. "No, sweetheart," she said fiercely. "No one's taking our home away. Not ever." Mark joined them, pulling them into a tight family hug. Outside, the early spring wind stirred the American flag at the end of their driveway, a quiet, stubborn testament to the life they'd fought so hard to protect. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek transformed. The interim HOA president, a mild-mannered retiree named Hank Morrison, called an emergency town hall to address the leadership transition. This time, the community center buzzed not with fear, but cautious hope. Emma and Mark sat near the front as Hank cleared his throat. "We've all learned a hard lesson," he said. "One voice should never control the many. The HOA is meant to protect us, not rule us." Cheers and scattered applause filled the room. Effective immediately, Hank continued, all outstanding fines related to non-essential violations are forgiven. Going forward, any major decisions will require majority homeowner approval. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. It wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about giving everyone their neighborhood back. Of course, not all scars healed overnight. Some neighbors still glanced around nervously at neighborhood barbecues, as if expecting Marlene to materialize from the shadows, clipboard in hand. Old habits died hard. But slowly, steadily, life returned to Willow Creek. Christmas decorations bloomed earlier than usual. Front lawns sported colorful pinwheels, not just approved hedge styles. Porch swings creaked as families lingered outside in the evenings. Freedom had a sound, Emma realized. Laughter drifting through the air, music floating over fence lines, dogs barking with joyful abandon. And as for the Brooks family, they found themselves at the center of it all, not as outcasts, but as quiet heroes. Neighbors waved when they walked Tyler to school. Anonymous casseroles showed up on their doorstep. Diego rebuilt their damaged fence free of charge. At a community potluck, Mrs. Jenkins pressed a handwritten note into Emma's hand. "Thank you for standing when we were too scared to." Emma tucked it into a drawer in the kitchen, a permanent reminder that even small acts of courage left echoes. Meanwhile, Marlene Fairbanks faded into infamy. The charges, harassment, trespassing, unlawful surveillance, were real and serious. Several neighbors filed civil suits. And when her court dates arrived, the same viral momentum that had humiliated her at the board meeting turned the public firmly against her. Emma never attended the trials. She didn't need to. Watching Marlene self-destruct in real time had never been the goal. Freedom had been the goal. Healing had been the goal. And they'd won. One golden Saturday morning, Emma planted new rose bushes along the front walk. Tyler knelt beside her, digging with an oversized plastic spade. Across the street, a "For Sale" sign swung in the breeze where Marlene's house once stood, stripped of its manicured tyranny. "Mom," Tyler said suddenly, "can we have a party when these flowers grow?" Emma laughed, wiping dirt from her forehead. "I think that's a great idea." "Like a big one," he insisted. "With everyone." Mark leaned on his rake nearby, grinning. "I think this whole street owes you a party already, kiddo." Tyler puffed out his chest with pride. Emma sat back on her heels, surveying the scene. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a storm waiting to hit. It felt open, full of possibility, full of life. And she knew, no matter what battles lay ahead, they would face them together. As a family, as a community. That night, as twilight deepened and porch lights flickered on up and down the street, Emma sat on the steps with a cup of coffee, watching the stars blink into view. Mark came out, sliding an arm around her shoulders. "Crazy year," he said quietly. Emma leaned into him. "We survived it." He kissed her temple. "We did more than survive. We changed things." She smiled against his chest. "I guess," she said, "sometimes you have to lose everything you thought was safe before you can find what really matters." The breeze picked up, stirring the rose bushes. From somewhere down the street came the sound of children laughing, loud, carefree, limitless. Emma closed her eyes and listened. The worst was behind them. The best was still ahead. And this time, no one would take it away.